The hearing will come to order, and welcome to each of our very, very distinguished witnesses. It's four people who have really made the difference and continue to make the difference in combating anti-Semitism. Thank you on behalf of the Tom Lantos Commission for being here, for your leadership, and again for providing this testimony at this critical hour. Welcome back to Ted Deutch. Ted's a good friend of all of us on both sides of the aisle. Ted and I, way back, worked on the Combating Anti-Semitism Caucus. We were co-chairs and did an amazing job, and we raised the issue in a totally bipartisan way, and I think that's important to show that there's no gaps between us. So I want to thank Ted for his leadership, and he's in a place where he can do even more, I think, good for the cause now. So thank you, Ted, for coming. And I know, Stacy, I remember you when you testified, and many, many years of advocacy and leadership. So thank you as well. I also want to thank Andy Baker, Rabbi Baker, who we've worked with at AJC for decades. He is the special rapporteur for combating anti-Semitism in the OSCE EPA. And when we had a hearing in the year 2002, Andy Baker was there, obviously, and many, many other distinguished individuals. But that's where we concocted the idea of having a OSCE conference. 1 year later, we had it in Austria. The next year was Berlin. And when it came down to actually writing the action plan for the Berlin conference, it was Andy Baker, who was the wordsmith. And it was all kinds of pushback from many of our colleagues in other countries in Europe. I won't name the countries, but you probably know who they are. But a great deal of pushback. And he wordsmithed a very, very effective document, which included such things as Holocaust remembrance and all the other important aspects to combating anti-Semitism across the board. So I'm always grateful for everything he has done. I did chair my first hearing on anti-Semitism when we took control. That goes back and forth a lot, but we took control after 40 years, so-called in the desert, in 1996. And we've had many, many hearings ever since on combating anti-Semitism. This is my 17th such hearing. Again, every one of them, Tom Lantos, the commission's is named after his very distinguished tenure in office and service. He and I went back and forth as chairman and ranking member of the Human Rights Committee for years. So a lot of those hearings were with him. We do miss him really very, very much. And his family, of course, continues his legacy so effectively. Sadly, the crisis that we all have been concerned about seems to be getting even worse, if that is possible. And it's reemerged in recent years as one of the signal scourges of our time. Now we need to hear from people like yourselves to give us a roadmap. You do it all the time, but we need to constantly, reevaluate and refocus. This is one of those. I would just point out that we were trying to get that conference at the OSCE. Everybody wanted to conflate it to anti-whatever, anti-Christian phobia, anti-Muslim beliefs, everything. And I argued, and others did very, thankfully, effectively, do all that. Not here. There needs to be a singular focus on this many millennium old hatred of Jews called anti-Semitism, and we did prevail. I do want to remind everybody that the Office to Combat and Monitor Anti-Semitism and the Special Envoy, I did offer that amendment, and then more recently offered the legislation to create the Ambassador at Large. It took over almost 2 years to get it out of the Senate. We all know the Senate moves slowly, far too slowly on everything, but it was like, what's the holdup? It was very discouraging, to say the least, but it did finally become law, and now we're waiting for Rabbi Yehuda Kaplan, who is the designated special envoy, to be confirmed by the Senate, so he can very robustly fulfill his mandate. In the days and weeks after October 7th, 2023, the United States and the entire world has seen a terrifying explosion of the most vicious and often violent anti-Semitism. That is to say, right after Hamas terrorists waged the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust, slaughtering babies, committing sexual violence, burning whole families alive, taking over 250 civilians hostage, murdering more than 1,200 1,500 Israelis. The entire world saw a shockingly dramatic spike in anti-Semitism that coincided with that. The slow-burning sickness of anti-Semitism can be seen right here. Anti-Semitism spiked globally when Jews were victims of the deadliest atrocity since the Holocaust, as I said. That is, evil has been there all along, but it just manifested, and too many people were willing to partake in it. You know, with regards to our colleges, I went to Rutgers, which is just outside of my district. A lot of my constituents go there. My brother graduated from there when there was a big sit-in with tents and all by the pro-Hamas crowd. And I had people come up to me shouting in my face from that organization, whatever the organizations were, there were a number of them. And there was a TV camera right there, and I said, get all of that, because I pushed back robustly as well. I couldn't believe how rude, how derogatory they were speaking of Jews. And then I thought, well, I'm going to be getting in a car maybe in 3 or 4 hours from now, but these students would be going back to their dorms, I'm talking about the Jewish students, perhaps to have these people following in the corridors to accost them and to harass them. Not enough was done. There were 10 requests, demands made by the picketers. Everybody knows about NYU and some of the other colleges, Harvard. And they caved all of them. When I talked to the president of the college, he says, well, we didn't really cave, we didn't do that. I said, they're claiming that you've given in on every single point. So violence can get results, hopefully not ever again, but it was a problem then. You know, in the United States, the explosion of anti-Semitism is not just on our campuses, but it's everywhere. We know in Europe in particular, it's become a cauldron of anti-Semitism, at least in many cities, including in Germany. And I will put my full statement in, but it goes on and lays out a number of details. In Latin America, anti-Semitism has also increased, and that is a problem. In Brazil, the anti-Semitic incitement of President Lula should come as no surprise. So that's another issue that we need to be focusing on. And in Colombia, President Petro began comparing Israel to the Nazis on October 9th, only 2 days after the slaughter of 1,500 Israelis. In Eastern and Southern Asia, Jewish communities are small and anti-Semitism relatively weak, but one ominous development deserves notice, and that is the People's Republic of China. In China, social media is heavily monitored and tightly controlled by the government, and yet anti-Semitic tropes, including the vicious ones that compare Israel to the Nazis, have been allowed to flourish. If that government wanted to shut them down, because everything is controlled by them, they could do it in a heartbeat. So, again, I want to thank all of you for being here. We have a great witness list and a good roster of members. I want to yield to the co-chair of our commission, Jim McGovern.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I join Co-Chair Smith in welcoming everybody to today's hearing on anti-Semitism around the world. Anti-Semitism is evil, disgusting, and wrong. It is real. It is a pernicious and destructive form of bigotry and hatred. It has long been recognized as a form of racial discrimination, one that through its vile and dark history has carried with it dehumanization, conspiracy theories, and violence. Following the mandate of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, today's hearing will examine anti-Semitism as it implicates the fundamental rights and human dignity of Jewish people, no matter where they live. As we have long stressed on this commission, on a bipartisan basis, solutions can be best found by following a human rights framework. I look forward to hearing the recommendations of our panelists on this aspect. When considering policies and strategies to confront anti-Semitism, the core question must be, does this make society more safe or less safe for the Jewish people? Anti-Semitism threatens the fundamental principles of equality, justice, human safety, and human dignity for all. Therefore, our response to anti-Semitism must uphold these fundamental principles. These conditions are best realized when society is open, free, and democratic, and when governments respect the fundamental rights of all people, regardless of national origin. This includes freedoms of expression, assembly, religion, and academic discourse, as well as due process. History tells us that societies that are not open, free, and democratic, where governments do not respect fundamental human rights, are not places where Jews can feel safe. And I'm worried. I'm worried because the United States government, including this Congress, does not appear to be taking an approach grounded in a human rights framework. In fact, I see our government restricting human rights in the name of confronting anti-Semitism. And I think that's counterproductive and a dangerous path. Last month, I traveled to Louisiana to visit Ramisa Ozturk in an ICE facility where she was being unlawfully detained. Ramisa was abducted off the streets in Somerville, Massachusetts in broad daylight by plainclothes ICE officers. All she did was write an article in the university newspaper. Our government punished her for exercising her rights of free expression and academic freedom in the name of combating anti-Semitism. A society in which the government punishes people for their views, authorizes security forces to seize them, subjects them to arbitrary detention, and denies them due process in contravention to their rights under international human rights law is not a society that is safe for Jews. I worry that anti-Semitism is being weaponized as a tool to attack political opponents rather than addressed with the gravity and the seriousness that such vile bigotry demands. Sometimes anti-Semitism can manifest as criticism of Israel, and all of us have witnessed anti-Semitic attacks against the government of Israel in the last couple of years, and even before that. But categorically labeling any criticism of the Israeli government as anti-Semitic is contrary to a human rights framework. No government on earth should be above criticism. Co-Chair Smith and I make a habit of criticizing our own government. What we should not do is shield the government of Israel, or any government, including ours for that matter, from legitimate scrutiny with respect to human rights. In fact, that can make anti-Semitism worse. It often comes from people who are confusing Judaism with the state of Israel, feeding the very conspiracy theories that nurture anti-Semitism. Many organizations, including some represented here today, have reported on the dramatic growth of anti-Semitic incidents and messages around the world, a trend that predates the horrific Hamas terrorist attacks of October 7, 2023. We hope to develop a greater understanding of these trends so that we can craft appropriate policy responses. But one thing our government must not do is to contribute to the problem. In Hungary, Viktor Orban and his party have given voice to anti-Semitic tropes by using the name of Hungarian-born Jewish financier George Soros to invoke the notion of a shadowy, foreign-inspired conspiracy. Orban has rehabilitated Miklos Horthy, a vocal anti-Semite and Nazi collaborator during World War II. President Trump has warmly embraced and praised Viktor Orban, hosting him at Mar-a-Lago. This does not make society safe for Jews. In Germany, the far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD party, includes neo-Nazis in its ranks, and its leaders have peddled anti-Semitism. Vice President J.D. Vance met with its leaders in Munich in February. And when Germany's domestic intelligence agency identified AfD as, quote, confirmed right-wing extremist endeavor, both Vice President Vance and Secretary Marco Rubio rushed to defend AfD. This does not make society safe for Jews. Elon Musk, given a powerful role in the Trump administration, told an AfD rally in January that it's time to move on from past guilt. This was a few days after Musk made what looked like a Nazi salute at President Trump's inauguration. This does not make society safe for Jews. It is the tradition of this commission to examine human rights problems and ask what the U.S. government and this Congress can do to help improve the situation. At times, we receive negative recommendations, as in the U.S. government should not do something it is currently doing. This appears to be one of those cases. We cannot ignore that U.S. government officials are exacerbating the problem that we're trying to address. So make no mistake, anti-Semitism is unacceptable, it is disgusting, and it is wrong. And unfortunately, it is on the rise in this country and around the world. Let us see each other's humanity and reject hate. Let us create the conditions where everyone can be treated with dignity and respect. And again, I thank our witnesses for being here. I have studied all the many things that you have written on this subject, and I look forward to your recommendations. And again, let me welcome my former colleague, Ted Deutch here. It's great to see him back on the Hill. I wish he was still here. In any event, with that, I look forward to hearing from all of you, and I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to yield to Steve Cohen. Steve used to serve as chair of the Commission on Security Cooperation in Europe, and I believe when it's announced, will be ranking member again. Steve.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for holding this hearing on anti-Semitism. It's so important that we have this hearing because it is on the rise in the world and in the United States. Many reports indicate the acts of anti-Semitism around the world increased after the Hamas attack on October 7. Left-wing anti-Semitism on college campuses around the world is a concern, and I want every Jewish student to feel safe in school and wherever they go. But at the same time, we can't lose focus on the explicitly violent and hateful groups that have been increasing their attacks on the Jewish community: neo-Nazis, the alt-right, and white supremacists. And they've been doing it for a long time. They've been doing it ever since I can remember, and they've been doing it for probably as long as they've been around, because that's what they're about. That's the nexus they have, and the nexus they have to their groups and they try to grow is anti-Semitism. They carried tiki torches in Charlottesville saying, "Jews will not replace us." I don't know what the hell they were talking about, but that's part of their team, that Jewish people are trying to do some type of getting people out of work and bringing these people in and replace them with people from Latin America. Horse manure. People have led, some of those people were here on January the 6th, involved in violence at the Capitol. And there were people who have been murdered, Jews in synagogues like the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018. And we shouldn't forget the North Valley Jewish Community Center in L.A., injured 3 children, or shootings and fire bombings at synagogues and Jewish organizations in Oklahoma City in 2004, Seattle 2006, Kansas City 2014, in Poway, California 2019, and Muncie, New York in 2019, to name a few. And when I was a kid, it was always about Atlanta. And there were bombings in Atlanta at the Temple in the 50s. And that's gone on forever, and it's been white supremacists who've done it, Klansmen, and nobody seems to be thinking they even exist anymore and attack them. They are the prime enemy of anti-Semitism in this country. The Palestinians, not great, the ones that are protesting and saying some things that they're saying. But they're not anywhere as bad and as dangerous as the homegrown terrorists and anti-Semites who our current administration cuddles up with, huddles up with, and beloves. That's a shame. White supremacy has been a part of our history for the entire existence of Jews, and violent anti-Semitism has always been a part of the American Jewish experience. They've been emboldened by our government. Mr. McGovern made an excellent opening statement, and he brought up a lot of the instances where they're trying to help Jewish people and wipe out anti-Semitism, but they just go the opposite direction on college campuses and other places. But they're just picking out the people they want to pick on. This administration wants to pick on educated people, intellectuals, and the Ivy folks. So they found anti-Semitism as a way to attack them and not say we're going after the educated or the liberals, the elites, the people like what's the name of the college there in Budapest that Soros started, Eastern Central, blah blah blah. They chased it out of Budapest, and I think they went to Prague because Orban didn't want educated people. He didn't want liberal education. Anyway, all education should be liberal in terms of scope of giving people all dimensions of history and not have certain histories eliminated. You can't eliminate what's happened in the past with racism, slavery, and anti-Semitism because you want to eliminate it. That's part of history, and it's what should be taught, and people will learn about it, or they're doomed to repeat it. Trump is called Jews disloyal. He's claimed no self-respecting Jewish person would vote for Democrats. Well, 70 to 75% people do, so obviously Trump thinks they're not self-respecting Jewish people. He also, of course, thinks Democrats are lunatics and communists. So that makes Jews lunatics, communists, and not self-respecting. And that's who our president is. And he refers to the people the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville. They were fine people on both sides. There weren't fine people on both sides. There were fine people on one side, and there were terrorists and bigots and anti-Semites on the other side, no matter what he says. So that's enough, but that's what I believe, and I want each of y'all to discuss that, because too much of this has been about people who are protesting First Amendment rights to say they don't like the war. I don't like the war either. Hamas started it. Hamas is awful. But what they did doesn't necessarily permit and endorse genocide, or what looks like genocide, in Gaza. It needs to stop. And the Israeli government, I criticize. The people of Israel criticize it. And that needs to stop. But we need to concentrate on our homegrown terrorists and our homegrown anti-Semites. And there are a lot of them, and there are a lot of them in the administration. A lot of people have made anti-Semitic remarks and who've been appointed to positions of power by this president. And they're putting in positions that's scary to me, and the whole future's scary with what's been going on. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Steve. I would just point out for the record that This is a hearing on worldwide persecution of Jews. I have had real arguments with the Biden administration, the Obama administration, but never let it spill over to the point where the attacks were as personal as that just was. I do respect you, Steve. We've been friends for years, but I do believe that Israel has no better friend on the face of the earth than President Trump. Now, we can all disagree as to how that manifests itself, but I do think he is a very staunch supporter. And you know, in the last 4 years, we all tried to rally behind President Biden and his efforts to combat anti-Semitism. We had several meetings with the bipartisan caucus with various leaders, and it was always about how do we protect Jews. And I hope we could stay there. Let me ask Jerry Nadler if he might have any opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Co-Chair Smith and McGovern for convening this important and timely hearing. We all know that anti-Semitism is on the rise in this country and around the world. As a lifelong Zionist, I am also keenly aware that anti-Semitism has surged since Hamas's horrific terrorist attack on October 7, 2023, the bloodiest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. This surge, as we will hear from the witnesses, requires emergency-level responses. And let's be clear, when it comes to hate, what starts with Jews rarely ends with Jews. It's also important for us to recognize that the anti-Semitism crisis does not end at the borders of the United States. Indeed, anti-Semitism abroad is a tremendously important challenge we must tackle. But in order for us to address it effectively, we must also acknowledge and understand the challenges we have here at home. As former Special Envoy to Combat and Monitor Anti-Semitism, Ambassador Deborah Lipstadt said in her first address in the role, quote, "It is increasingly hard to differentiate between anti-Semitism that is foreign and that which is domestic," close quote. With the proliferation of social media, an idea hatched by an anti-Semite in Europe can be acted upon in America, and the manifesto written in a basement in any of our districts can lead to an attack anywhere around the world. I'm sad to have to say that as we face rising anti-Semitism in our country, the United States government currently is acting as a catalyst, not a deterrent. This is seen clearly, for example, in the case of Charles Kleinhaus, who recently moved here from South Africa to the United States. He was one of the 59 white South Africans that the Trump administration fast-tracked and resettled as refugees. As the Trump administration slashes refugee resettlement for nearly all vulnerable populations around the world, they determined not only that these white Afrikaners meet their standards for refugee status, while continuing to deny many peoples from war-torn regions around the world, but that the need is so acute they must expedite their resettlement. Mr. Kleinhaus has a troubling history of anti-Semitism. In April of 2023, he tweeted that Jews were, quote, untrustworthy, and, quote, a dangerous group, and that, quote, they are not God's chosen. So while the Trump administration seeks the deportation of students from American campuses for exercising constitutionally protected speech in the name of combating anti-Semitism, it is happy to resettle individuals who have engaged in explicitly anti-Semitic rhetoric. This action is clearly hypocritical and exemplifies the chilling McCarthy-esque actions of the administration. And the list doesn't end with refugee resettlement. Do we really think that cutting funding to universities, funding used for cancer and other medical research, is going to somehow magically stop anti-Semitism on college campuses? If President Trump's commitment to anti-Semitism isn't simply a convenient vehicle to pursue a partisan ideological war on higher education or liberal thought, why has he cut funding, staff, and offices of the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights? This office is the federal government's agency charged by Congress to investigate anti-Semitism on college campuses. The Trump administration's cuts to OCR reveal their concern for anti-Semitism on campus and America and around the world to be no more than crocodile tears. In fact, if President Trump were actually serious about combating anti-Semitism, he'd start with his own administration. For example, Kingsley Wilson, Deputy Press Secretary of the Department of Defense, has a history of promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and engaging in anti-Semitic rhetoric. In 2023, she wrote that, quote, America is quite literally based on blood and soil, unquote, which, according to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, is an early Nazi slogan used in Germany to evoke the idea of a pure Aryan race, and the territory it wanted to conquer. Ed Martin currently serves in a variety of senior positions in the Department of Justice. He was named to these posts by President Trump after the president was forced to withdraw his nomination to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia because of Martin's lavish praise and longtime association with anti-Semites and Nazi sympathizers. In addition, on his podcast, Martin compared President Joe Biden to Adolf Hitler and repeated the defamatory lie that Jews who vote for Democrats are somehow less Jewish. And to return to the international realm, Sebastian Gorka serves as Deputy Assistant to President Trump and Senior Director for Counterterrorism at the National Security Council. Infamously, at a 2017 Trump inaugural ball, Gorka publicly wore a medal of the Vitesse Rend, a group listed by the U.S. State Department as having been, quote, under the direction of the Nazi government of Germany during World War II, close quote. Gorka has been affiliated with a number of anti-Semitic and racist organizations in Hungary, including the now illegal anti-Semitic Hungarian Jobbik Party and its Hungarian Guard militia. The Guard has referred to Jews as, quote, Zionist rats, close quote, and locusts, and called Hungarian Jews, quote, nation destroyers. The Jewish Daily Forward reported that Gorka, quote, swore lifelong allegiance to a Hungarian neo-Nazi group known as the Vitesse Rand before he came to the United States. All of these officials hold positions in the Trump administration. If Trump were serious about combating anti-Semitism, he could start by firing them all today. And he would also withdraw the nomination of Rabbi Yehuda Kaplan to the post of Special Envoy to combat and monitor anti-Semitism with the rank of ambassador. During last year's presidential campaign, Rabbi Kaplan falsely claimed that President Biden, quote, won't even make a statement about combating anti-Semitism, close quote. Did Rabbi Kaplan forget that it was the Biden administration that developed and released the first ever U.S. national strategy to counter anti-Semitism? Did he forget that President Biden would regularly invoke the anti-Semitism of the neo-Nazis in Charlottesville as the very reason he returned to public life to seek higher office? Perhaps most offensively, Rabbi Kaplan publicly claims that after October 7th, quote, Democrats refused to even recognize the butchers of women and kidnappers of children as terrorists, close quote. This absurd and insulting claim does not deserve a response, but it should be disqualifying. I hope all the organizations represented on the panel will join with me in strongly opposing this nomination. Rabbi Kaplan's past comments and subsequent nomination do follow a pattern. It's the same pattern seen in the Trump administration's hiring of known anti-Semites and in their dealings with students on campus. To the Trump administration, Jewish safety, like the safety of all minorities in America, does not hold inherent value. Rather, it's a tool to be deployed in the service of their agenda. I, for one, am tired of being used. Millions of American Jews are tired of actions being taken in their name that are in direct contradictions to their values. Anti-Semitism is a real and serious problem in the United States. It is a real and serious and potentially murderous problem abroad. And we must address it properly and with tools designed to fight it, not designed to destroy medical research. I hope our panelists will speak to this depravity and disparity coming from the Trump administration's handling of anti-Semitism, as I hope they will speak to how we fight anti-Semitism in general. I pray that we do not all lose sight of the administration's brutal politicization of anti-Semitism and the detrimental impact it has on Jewish safety in America and around the world. I hope we discuss this, and I hope we discuss the general problem of dealing with anti-Semitism at home and around the world. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Suzanne von Mitzi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful to be here today for this important conversation, and I'm going to look forward to the testimony, and I'm interested in hearing from the witnesses who are here today, and I just want to give a special welcome to my former colleague, Ted Deutch, today. So I look forward to the conversation, and I will have questions after. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the panel. Ted Deutch assumed the role of CEO of the American Jewish Committee on October 1st, 2022. He joined AJC following more than 12 years of service in the U.S. House. He did serve as chair of the House Ethics Committee, one of the most difficult positions, I think, on Capitol Hill, a senior member of the House Judiciary Committee, and a senior member of House Foreign Affairs, also as chair of the Middle East, North Africa, and Global Counterterrorism Subcommittee. As a founding co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, Ted spoke passionately on the House floor over and over again, confronting even colleagues who invoked anti-Semitic tropes or disparaged Israel. He did help to craft a number of policies, and it was my privilege to work with him on that bipartisan task force. We'll then hear from Marina Rosenberg, who's Senior Vice President, International Affairs for the Anti-Defamation League. Marina is, it's a very small print, oversees ADL's work combating anti-Semitism and hate outside of the United States, as well as supporting the Jewish and democratic state of Israel. She leads a team of professionals in the U.S., Europe, and Israel, pursuing ADL mission of fighting anti-Semitism globally, promoting the security of Jewish communities around the world, and advocating for a safe and democratic state of Israel. A former ambassador and diplomat, she joined ADL in early 2023 after 16 years of service in Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, leading diplomatic missions abroad. Very distinguished career. We'll then hear from Rabbi Eric Fusfeld, who's the Director of B'nai B'rith International Center for Human Rights and Public Policy, and also Director of the Legislative Affairs for B'nai B'rith International. He has been in that position since 2007 and Leg Affairs since 2003. He is responsible for B'nai B'rith's policy, advocacy, and government relations, including formulating and promoting B'nai B'rith agenda on Capitol Hill and implementing the agency before Congress, the executive branch, foreign governments, and international organizations. We'll then hear from Stacy Burdett, who for a long time worked with ADL, and I got to know her very well in that position. She's now a consultant, anti-Semitism response and prevention. She too works with policy members and nonprofits in promoting strategies to prevent and respond to anti-Semitism. She has been a force for many decades, and I want to thank her for that leadership. It has made the difference time and time again. So thank you, Stacy. Ted, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the Commission. It's a pleasure to testify in front of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission on the worldwide persecution of Jews. I want to thank you for calling this important hearing, and I'm honored to be here alongside my distinguished panelists, Marina, Eric, and Stacy. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the kind and deserving words about Andy Baker that I will be sure to relate to him. During my time as member of the House, I constantly tried to put human rights at the center of our foreign policy, and I'm grateful to you for doing just that through your important work on this commission. I am here in my capacity as CEO of American Jewish Committee, a global nonpartisan advocacy organization that stands up for Israel's right to exist in peace and security, confronts anti-Semitism no matter the source, and upholds the democratic values that unite Jews and our allies. Today, global Jewish communities have seen anti-Semitism spike since the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust, when Hamas terrorists attacked Israel on October 7th, 2023, murdering over 1,200 people, taking more than 250 people hostage, including 58 still held in captivity today, more than 20 of whom are still alive. To be clear, Hamas, a terrorist organization committed to the destruction of the state of Israel and the massacre of Jews, infiltrated the country on a Jewish holiday to murder, burn, rape, and take people hostage. In response, many around the world shockingly praised this mayhem and murder and marched in support of the destruction. What's more, Hamas's benefactor is the largest state sponsor of terror, beats women for wearing hijabs incorrectly, targets its own minority communities, and calls for the destruction of Israel and the United States daily. There's no question who I'm talking about, it's Iran. And as we spend this hearing rightfully focused on global anti-Semitism, we must call out the entity that is both propagating this hate and benefiting from it. The IRGC's targeting of Jews, Iran's support for terrorists, violation of human rights, its active role in spreading vile anti-Semitism across the globe must matter today in this hearing and must matter in any negotiations pursued with the Iranian regime. In Europe, the German Jewish community faces an average of 32 anti-Semitic incidents a day. In France, 1 in 4 French Jews say they've been the victim of an anti-Semitic act, with young Jews more likely to be targets. In Amsterdam in 2024, Israeli and Jewish fans of the Maccabi Tel Aviv team were beaten on the street in a modern-day pogrom and a self-proclaimed Jew hunt. In Asia, anti-Semitic tropes like comparisons of Israel to the Nazis and Jewish money stereotypes have flourished on social media platforms, including in China, which heavily monitors online content. And in Latin America, leaders have fanned the flames of hate. These are a handful of examples of the anti-Semitism Jews are experiencing from the United States to Chile, Germany to South Africa to Australia, but I want to focus just on two countries. In Brazil, President Lula has compared Israel's action in its war of self-defense against Hamas to the Nazis' attempt to eradicate Jews from the face of the earth. It's a disgusting perversion of history to compare Israel ensuring the safety of its citizens to the systematic destruction and elimination of an entire people. Just last week, while in Moscow, Lula accused Israel of, quote, killing children and women deliberately, close quote. Jewish leaders in Brazil rightly called out this slanderous statement as blood libel, the widespread blame of Jews for horrific crimes, which has led to violence and destruction and persecution and massacres of Jewish people and communities throughout history. Jews today know the threat that they are facing. Jewish communities in Brazil, which I visited in the end of 2024, have recorded significant upticks in anti-Semitism since October 7th. According to our partners at CONIBI, the central organization of the Brazilian Jewish community, in the year after the October 7 attacks, there were nearly 1,800 anti-Semitic incidents reported, a record in Brazil. And while there, one Jewish leader told me that while in other countries that have anti-Semitism, they have leaders trying to fight it, in Brazil, there was no anti-Semitism, only a leader trying to create it. In France, the Jewish community, particularly young Jews, are under threat. At our global forum just last month, Antoine Hagenauer recounted that when he was attacked on the streets of Paris while attending a memorial for Shirik Fir and Ariel Bibas, two little Israeli boys and their mother butchered by Hamas, that he was berated, that he was told he supported genocide. Before being punched in the head, he was threatened that he would be followed home, his address would be leaked, his family would be killed. And when he reported the attack to the police, the officer told him, what would be the point? These stories make clear that anti-Semitism is an issue no matter where you are in the world, and though it might start as simply appalling rhetoric, it can and it has led to violence. These two instances should also be clarifying moments for Congress. So what can Congress do to fight anti-Semitism? Well, making sure that fighting it is a priority across Congress as both a threat to human rights and a threat to liberal democracy if left unchecked. From engaging with senior foreign officials and visiting Jewish communities when you travel abroad, to elevating the issue of anti-Semitism at hearings like this, and to staying engaged at the UN and other multilateral bodies, because hate and anti-Semitism will become normalized when we shirk from our global leadership. Raise the issue of global anti-Semitism during relevant confirmation hearings. Encourage governments and departments at home and abroad to join the 46 other countries and over 1,000 cities, counties, and states in using the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism as a tool to more fully explain this multifaceted hate. The Senate should move quickly to confirm the President's nomination of Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. And Congress should provide $3 million for the office so that the U.S. can continue to be the moral leader on the world stage to fight anti-Semitism and protect the Jewish community globally. Congress should urge our allies and partners to adopt the global guidelines, which 42 countries have adopted, and the State Department has promoted, and provide a comprehensive framework for outlining actionable steps for governments to combat anti-Semitism. U.S. leadership is critical in this fight. And at this moment, American leadership in the global fight against anti-Semitism is more important than ever. Around the world, Jews are facing rising violence, harassment, and intimidation. Across continents, anti-Semitism has become normalized, and age-old conspiracies have found new life, amplified by technology and legitimized by public figures. In the U.S., it's a bar in Philadelphia where a sign saying, "F the Jews," is lit up and paraded as people laugh. Or when many people come together to work on a music video about a song called Heil Hitler, with no one seeming to bat an eye. Across the world, extremist political parties are doubling down on anti-Semitism and Holocaust revisionism. At a minimum, they don't face any consequences, but often it is that vile rhetoric that fuels dramatic gains in their party's approval or support. In Romania, the far-right party, whose leader called the Holocaust a minor topic, surged ahead in the polls only to lose by a razor-thin majority earlier this week. In a country where almost all of the Jewish community are Holocaust survivors and their descendants, this minimization and trivialization of the Holocaust poses a direct threat to the Jewish community. This is as disgusting as it is outrageous, and it is incumbent upon us all to call it out and condemn this normalized Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism, in closing, does not just threaten Jewish communities. It threatens the values that hold free societies together. It fosters intolerance, it weakens democracy, it undermines human rights everywhere. That's why the Lantos Commission's work to combat this is so vital. This is a moral issue. It is about the kind of country that we are, the kind of world we want to pass on to our children. Congress must follow the Lantos Commission's lead and come together to stand up for Jewish communities around the globe and show the world what American leadership looks like at this moment. It is needed so, so desperately. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deutch. Tremendous testimony and your full statement, because it's very, very heavily filled with facts and very important points, will be made a part of the record, and all of your full statements will be made a part of the record, but please don't feel constrained by time. We need to hear from you. Ms. Rosenberg.
Thank you, Co-Chair Smith, Co-Chair McGovern, members of the Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the worldwide persecution of Jews, a subject that sadly could not be more urgent. I speak to you today not only as a former diplomat, but as Senior Vice President for International Affairs at ADL, the world's leading anti-hate organization. In this role, I engage with Jewish communities worldwide and regularly travel to meet with governments, NGOs, and communities to discuss anti-Semitism and Jewish security. Having just returned from Europe and the Middle East, I can say in no uncertain terms that we are facing a global resurgence of this ancient hatred, one that is emboldened, transnational, and increasingly normalized. While Hamas' October 7th attack intensified anti-Semitism worldwide, this surge began building over the past decade, which led ADL to co-found the J7 Task Force Against Anti-Semitism, bringing together the 7 largest Jewish communities outside Israel: Argentina, Australia, Canada, France, Germany, the UK, and the US, for regular consultations on trends and best practices to combat anti-Semitism. From Antwerp to Amsterdam, Montreal to Melbourne, Santiago to San Francisco, Jewish individuals and communities are confronting a multitude of threats. In 2024, ADL tracked nearly 10,000 anti-Semitic incidents in the US alone, the highest ever recorded. Alarmingly, for the first time, most of these incidents were linked to Israel or Zionism, including celebrations of the October 7th massacre, praise for Hamas, and explicit anti-Semitic tropes. Globally, the picture is just as dire. Our recent Global 100 survey found that 46% of the adult population, more than 2.2 billion people, harbor anti-Semitic beliefs, more than double the figure from 2014. We found global spikes in anti-Semitic attitudes, support for terrorist entities like Hamas, and staggering levels of Holocaust denial, distortion, and ignorance. The numbers were especially high among younger adults. This surge has real-world consequences. Synagogue firebombings, vandalism of Jewish institutions, targeting of Jewish students, assault and violent pogroms like the so-called Jew hunt we saw in Amsterdam. In Australia, Brazil, France, and the UK, anti-Semitic incidents have more than doubled since October 7th. Governments in Chile, South Africa, and Colombia have supported Hamas and promote anti-Semitic narratives, threatening their own Jewish communities. In Canada, a Jewish school was shot at on 3 separate occasions, and in Melbourne, a synagogue was firebombed. International institutions have worsened this crisis, especially the UN. Okay. Starting from the beginning. No. International institutions have worsened this crisis, especially the UN. UNRWA employees have been tied to the October 7th attack. And of course, the Iranian regime remains the top global exporter of anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, terrorism, and Holocaust denial and distortion. We have seen anti-Semitism spike on social media platforms and other online spaces, which threaten to embed anti-Semitism into the technology of tomorrow. This is a global emergency, and it demands a global, coordinated response now. That's why ADL urges Congress to support 7 key actions. First, protect Jewish communities at home and abroad. Fund the Nonprofit Security Grant Program to protect at-risk institutions in America at $500 million, and urge other countries to implement similar programs. 2, pass the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act to ensure the Department of Education continues to have tools to protect students on campus. 3, demand foreign countries take meaningful action to counter anti-Semitism, including adopting and implementing the global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism, holding them accountable through bilateral and multilateral trade and other agreements. 4, pass the Holocaust Education and Anti-Semitism Lessons, or HEAL Act, to assess Holocaust education nationally and encourage other countries to fight Holocaust denial and distortion through education. 5, act against state-controlled media like Iran's Press TV and Ispan TV and Qatar's Al Jazeera, which promote anti-Semitism, anti-American propaganda, Holocaust denial, and terrorism. 6, compel online platforms to increase transparency and enforce robust terms against cyber hate. And lastly, increase funding for the Office of the U.S. Special Envoy to Monitor and Combat Anti-Semitism at $3 million, and the Office of the U.S. Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues at $1.5 million. In the words of Congressman Lantos, and I quote, "We must take whatever steps we can to fight anti-Semitism." Distinguished members of the Commission, that time is now. Thank you for holding this hearing and for standing with the Jewish people in this critical fight.
Ms. Rosenberg, thank you so very much for your testimony and for your leadership. I'd like to now recognize Rabbi Fusfeld.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. It's an honor to appear before this commission today, and thank you for the invitation. And I would add, it's also a very welcome sight to see the bipartisan gathering around this issue. Anti-Semitism is a problem that requires a full cross-section of American society, regardless of background or partisan affiliation. I'm Rabbi Eric Fusfeld of B'nai B'rith International, a Jewish advocacy and social service organization founded in 1843 and with members today in more than 40 countries around the world. Anti-Semitism is the world's oldest and most resilient social pathology. It has existed for thousands of years and has been present in every generation and nearly every region where Jews have lived. And today, anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews, remains as pernicious and widespread as it has been at any time since the World War II era. Last year, the European Union's Fundamental Rights Agency released a survey conducted before the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, in which nearly all Jewish respondents said they had experienced anti-Semitism in the preceding year. 8 of 10 said that anti-Semitism had increased in recent years. Reports of anti-Semitic incidents then spiked dramatically in multiple European countries in the months following the October 7th Hamas atrocities, creating a broader milieu that feels threatening and hostile to many Jewish people. There's been a significant increase in sympathy for the Palestinians among young people and activists since October 7th. Levels of sympathy for Israel are much lower, even in the very immediate wake of the Hamas attacks. The disdain for Israel is likely to lead many Jews to feel a greater sense of alienation from the societies in which they live. Another battleground in the fight against anti-Semitism has been the growing threat against Jewish religious freedom. in the areas of Brit Milah, or ritual circumcision, and shchita, or kosher slaughter, denying Jews the right to these essential acts of religious freedom, especially on European soil where the greatest crimes against the Jewish people were perpetrated, is not just discriminatory, it's a threat to the continued existence of European Jewry. Anti-Semitism in the form of a contemporary version of Holocaust denial has emerged, as Israel's detractors claim that Jews are worse than Nazis and that Israel is perpetrating a Holocaust upon the Palestinians. Rhetorical attacks on Israel often feature phrases such as ethnic cleansing, forced transfers, and human rights violations. Claims that Jews are exploiting the Holocaust to collect reparation money, or that they've used the Holocaust to justify the creation of an apartheid state, also serve as troubling examples of the misuse of the Holocaust for political purposes. And I have to add, with the passing of decades and the passing of Holocaust survivors, who now number fewer than 250,000 around the world, the lessons of the Holocaust can easily become diminished. And this happens when we make inappropriate Holocaust analogies. I think any reference to President Biden or President Trump or any contemporary politician as Hitler is deplorable, and it only weakens the power of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations. And with respect to Germany, as you referenced, Mr. Co-Chairman, we reject any calls for Germany to put the Holocaust behind them, or however they might phrase it. In other words, to de-emphasize it. Germany should remain a leader in Europe in Holocaust education and commemoration. They have been until now, and they should continue to do so. Social media's algorithms toward content that elicits user responses, the algorithms reward content that elicit user responses, even if those responses are negative. This is how Holocaust denial and anti-Zionism have thrived on the internet. Even if you're denouncing an anti-Semitic post or calling out the person who published it, it can increase the likelihood that the content will be promoted on the platform. B'nai B'rith, with its extensive contacts in Latin America, last year contributed to a World Zionist Organization report that documented the growth of anti-Semitism on that continent. Argentina, Brazil, and Chile are among the countries highlighted because of a rise in discriminatory attitudes, hate speech, and physical attacks. As in Europe, the events of October 7th, 2023, have been a significant turning point for anti-Semitism. In Brazil, President Lula stirred controversy by comparing Israel's military operations to Nazi actions, an example of a gross misuse of a Nazi analogy that is a characteristic manifestation of modern anti-Semitism. Similarly, President Petro in Colombia frequently posts social media content that has been criticized as anti-Semitic. Another example of a national leader fanning the flames of Jew hatred. In Chile, where Israel is routinely attacked in the media, there's a serious fear of being identified on the street as a Jew, and Jews are advised not to frequent certain places. Jewish institutions face threats from mobs, including an incident in which a pregnant woman was accused of, quote, carrying a future genocidal. One of the greatest explosions of anti-Semitism over the past year has occurred in Australia, where incidents have increased fourfold, more than 400%, and yielded reports of vandalism, harassment, and a possible bomb plot. Egg throwing, swastika graffiti, arson, and other crimes were among the assaults on the Jewish community. Police outside of Sydney found a cache of the mining explosive known as power gel, along with a list of Jewish targets, and are investigating whether the activities have been funded by foreign entities. B'nai B'rith Canada's League for Human Rights, in its 2024 annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents, detailed an increase of more than 200% in incidents over the previous year. B'nai B'rith urged new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to prioritize the fight against anti-Semitism as his government takes office, citing, quote, the profound negative effect on the day-to-day lives of Jewish Canadians. In the Arab and Muslim world, anti-Semitism has become a central motivator behind radical Islamist movements who use satellite TV and the internet to unify disparate groups against a common enemy and provide a scapegoat for societal grievances. State actors in the Middle East also play a role in fomenting anti-Semitism. The dictatorship in Iran, for example, routinely perpetuates anti-Semitic narratives, incorporating hatred of Jews in Israel as part of their official ideology and using it to bolster their anti-Zionism and Holocaust denial, as well as legitimizing their nefarious foreign policies. As anti-Semitic incidents continue to mount, the need for awareness of anti-Semitism's real-life manifestations and impact becomes more apparent. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition is an important tool for education and guidance. Governments and civil society must continue to use it. And I would add, Mr. Co-Chairman, since this was referenced earlier, the IHRA working definition specifically says that criticism of Israel per se is not anti-Semitism. It's a question of when that criticism crosses the line into anti-Semitism, using anti-Semitic tropes and so forth. And that's something we need to remain vigilant against. Last July in Buenos Aires, Argentina, participating states and international bodies convened to adopt the Global Guidelines on Countering Anti-Semitism, a useful compendium of non-legally binding best practices that have helped formulate public policy in numerous countries. These global guidelines, which I've referenced in greater detail in my written submission, are a roadmap for addressing the problem of anti-Semitism and include a call on countries to strengthen international collaboration and cultivate a whole-of-society approach that requires the active participation of both civil society and governments. And I would add another point about the politicization of anti-Semitism. It's so important to remind ourselves that anti-Semitism exists across the spectrum, on the far right, on the far left, among radical Islamists. And we have to call it out everywhere it exists. We can't just out of convenience identify it when we see it on the other side, but not when it's closer to us. And this is something that Felix Klein, who is Germany's Commissioner for Jewish Life and Countering Anti-Semitism, has made a regular theme, and he's right to point this out. Today, cascading events around the globe underscore the urgency of continuing to fight this persistent social illness of anti-Semitism in all its forms and mutations, with all the defiance we can summit. Such moral clarity is needed now more than ever. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. That was very powerful. I'd like to now recognize Stacy Burdett for such time as she may.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. You've heard today that by every metric that we have in every region of the world, anti-Semitism is going up. Incidents are being recorded and counted at their highest level on record. And just like the October 7th attack rewrote the book on depravity and sadism, the anti-Semitic incidents that came as a backlash after those attacks are anything but veiled, anything but nuanced. They are brazen. We're in some very turbulent times. No matter who you voted for in any country, things feel uncertain. And you can be sure that where chaos and division serve a purpose for bad actors, there you will find anti-Semitism and conspiracy theories. Politics has always been one of those arenas. The normalization of anti-Semitism, either explicitly or through code signaling, is a global trend. The challenge for this commission, for you, is that we don't have the same leverage around the world to fight it that we used to. our moral authority is severely compromised because the same anti-Semitism is being normalized in the halls of power and on the streets in our country. And none of us in this room are satisfied by that. Rabbi Fusfeld wrote in his testimony about a report from Tel Aviv University about a pervasive trend of scapegoating Jews for COVID. What can we say about that to countries of the world when our own senior official responsible for health policy has said the same thing? We aren't in a good position to promote the fight against anti-Semitism around the world. And we know that anti-Semitism we're in a Human Rights Commission. We know that anti-Semitism is a bad warning. It's deeply connected to the erosion of democracy and democratic norms. We are so far past the early warning signs that you talk about in your Holocaust education class. The social taboos are gone. Wildly anti-Semitic scapegoating is smack in the heart of the politics and the culture of so many countries, including our own. I wrote in my statement about the case of a Lithuanian member of parliament who trafficked in the worst kind of anti-Semitic speech. He campaigned as a defender of Lithuanian sovereignty. He said he was a victim of elites trying to silence him for telling the truth about Jews, about the Holocaust in Lithuania, and about Israel. The Vilnius District Prosecutor's Office opened an investigation into whether his comments violated their hate speech laws and their laws against incitement to violence. The parliament stripped him of his immunity so he could stand trial. His anti-Semitic statements were condemned by government leaders across the political spectrum, including the president, the speaker, the prime minister, and the foreign minister, and they were not members of the same party. I'm not going to say we should follow Lithuania as a model. That's a hard concept, and I think all of us are probably pained by this. We've talked here also about the recommendations about passing Holocaust education laws. The Holocaust is being minimized and trivialized and distorted in so many places, even sadly in parts of Germany where we didn't think that was going to happen again. In normal times, I'd recommend that you vote for a Holocaust education bill also. But these aren't normal times. Our own government has eliminated Holocaust remembrance in the Department of Defense as part of their war on preference programs like Black History Month. Our children, no matter where we live in the world, our children have seen Nazi salutes from the most prominent platforms in their lives. Ukrainian authorities opened a criminal investigation into 3 protesters who flashed Nazi salutes at a Holocaust memorial. In Belgium, 3 protesters are being prosecuted now. In Helsinki, a student was kicked out of a tech competition after performing a Nazi salute. Even though that gesture might be legally permissible in some countries, including our own, the point is that people all over the world understand the chilling significance of that most ubiquitous gesture in our world, in our political culture. And so many good Americans are outraged about the normalizing of these symbols and ideas. Some of the members who cited anti-Semitism being promoted in parts of the administration are right. And it's difficult. I don't want to be personal, but it feels personal. Because the voice of a man in a bar that Congressman Deutch mentioned singing a song called Heil Hitler, that person's voice is not as powerful as a press spokesman for the Department of Defense, as an interim U.S. attorney, as the communications director of OMB. It feels personal, and it's painful, and I want to be polite, and I want to have decorum. So my only recommendation today is that we listen to Jewish people all over this country, thousands of rabbis, dozens and dozens of organizations, mainstream pro-Israel organizations, who are speaking out about the normalizing of extremism in our country. All the rest of the recommendations are details. And we have a wealth of fantastic recommendations in the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism that was launched in 2023. It is the most comprehensive roadmap I've ever seen for countering anti-Semitism. If we want to promote that kind of action in other countries, we should fund and support our foreign policy tools and allow our diplomats and professionals to do their jobs. And instead of pressing other countries to adopt definitions, we should speak out against what we know in our hearts and our minds, and by any standard, any definition, is anti-Semitic, is being expressed today. And the global guidelines that our government has been promoting say it pretty plainly. I love the first two guidelines. Speak out. Governments and political leaders should denounce anti-Semitism swiftly, clearly, and unequivocally, wherever and whenever it occurs. Number two, avoid politicization. Anti-Semitism can appear across the political spectrum and should be rejected without political bias and regardless of its origin. No one on this commission is anything but appalled by anti-Semitism, whether it's expressed as white nationalism or conspiracy theories or being espoused by anyone in our country or any other country. Mr. McGovern, you asked for what is our standard in looking at recommendations. Does it make us more safe or less safe? That's the human rights standard that you talked about. The overt embrace of these ideas will do harm to all of us and to this exceptional country that we love and where Jews have flourished, and that we never give up on continuing to perfect. So I just want to sum up my testimony in 3 words. Lead by example. Walk the walk with the moral strength of our ideals and our principles of pluralism, democracy, and civil rights protections. That's the greatness of our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stacy. My good friend and colleague, Co-Chair McGovern, does have a meeting on reconciliation that he has to be at.
Unfortunately, I'm also on the Rules Committee, and we're meeting at 1 in the morning on the reconciliation. But I just want to just say thank you to all of you. All 4 of you, I thought, delivered a very powerful presentation, and I wish all of our colleagues could hear it, because I think this is the way we should talk about this issue. And Ms. Burdett, thank you for, I guess, to lead by example. I think we all can do a better job. But I just want, again, we do these hearings all the time, and not all the time do I come away agreeing with all of the witnesses. But this is one of those exceptions, and I really appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate your commitment to this issue, and I look forward to working with you in the future. And so thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Co-Chair McGovern. Thank you all for your testimonies. I do have a few questions, and I'll yield to my colleagues for any questions they might have. You know, a moment ago, it was stated that there's like no more restraint. People, it doesn't matter. They don't think there's any penalty. And the hatred for Jews just is skyrocketing. I had a hearing in the year 2002. It was a very, very important hearing. You name the important group, and they were all there, and it helped us mobilize for the OSCE, both in the Parliamentary Assembly, which I did resolutions on, but also, more importantly, I think, in the OSCE itself, and that's where Rabbi Andy Baker played such a crucial role. But Shimon Samuels from the Wiesenthal Center said, and I quote him, "The Holocaust for 30 years after the war acted as a protective Teflon against blatant anti-Semitic expression. That Teflon has eroded, and what was considered distasteful and politically incorrect is becoming simply an opinion." But at fine English dinners, as he said, it ends in Molotov cocktails against the synagogues. So, what was at first seen as, unthinkable has now become not just thinkable, but blatant, and you've all expressed concerns about that. When you were talking, Rabbi Fusfeld, about the different Chile and certainly Australia, do you have a sense, any of you, of which countries are taking seriously when they have these kinds of manifestations within their borders to take very concrete and effective action, as opposed to those like President Lulu, which two of you have mentioned, not only looks the other way, but becomes part of the problem. I would note parenthetically, when I was fighting to get a child who was abducted to Brazil back to his parent in my state of New Jersey, I'll never forget, as we came out of one meeting, there were people outside of that meeting saying, "Dirty Jew," to the man that I was with trying to reclaim his son. And no pushback except from us, but it was very telling to me that, it's very serious, that was many, many years ago. Lula was the president then, and now he's back. So if you want to speak to like Australia, are they doing something to try to crack down on this? Yes, Ms. Rosenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. So I just came back from Berlin 2 weeks ago when we had a meeting of the J7 countries, the Jewish representatives of the 7 largest Jewish communities, which include Australia. And we were there to commemorate 80 years to the end of the Second World War in Europe and the end of the Shoah. And unfortunately, instead of just commemorating the end of the war and hopefully the end of anti-Semitism, we had a press conference revealing our J7 report on the dire state of anti-Semitism in all the 7 countries with the largest Jewish communities outside of Israel. So we'll just start by saying that all these countries have seen a spike in anti-Semitism from 2021 to 2023, starting with the US with a spike of 227% in anti-Semitic incidents, France 185%, UK 90%, and it goes on. In the case of Australia, between 2021 and 2023, they saw only 11% rise in anti-Semitism. But as my colleague mentioned, in 2024, they've seen over 317% spike in anti-Semitic incidents in the year 2024 alone, which is very unusual for Australia. Though the government there has taken some steps to fight anti-Semitism, we find that it's simply not good enough and that the response was slow. And when we compare to other countries in the J7, for example, Germany, that can be a positive example of steps that have been taken for many years now to fight anti-Semitism, including having not just one special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, but 2, and having special commissioners on anti-Semitism in the different lenders, meaning in the states, and including in the Berlin police, and they have Holocaust education and education on Jewish living and so forth. They tick all the boxes necessary, and still Germany has the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents per Jewish capita among the J7 countries. This means that we really need a whole-of-society approach to fighting anti-Semitism. It is not enough just for governments and parliaments across the world to take action, though it's important and they need to show leadership, but we also need civil society, educations, and other non-governmental organizations, and including the workplace, to take concrete action to support the Jewish community and to secure their safety. Thank you.
Okay, can I add
sure.
to that? Sure. Yeah, the Australian government, I think, is alarmed, as they should be, by this, not just a spike in the number of incidents, but the intensity and the violence, a lot of these incidents, arson, bomb plots, and so forth. They haven't really encountered it before on this scale. And so they are trying to deal with the problem in terms of public safety. But there's another dimension to this, and it's what Marina Rosenberg just sort of alluded to. I mean, the importance of civil society and the whole of society approach. We're losing the narrative a lot of this is fueled by anti-Israel sentiment. And it's like we're losing a PR battle to terrorists who rape women and decapitate babies. Somehow, in that morality play, Israel is the bad guy, which is shocking to all of us. But that's how it has played out on the public stage. And so it does take all of us to turn the narrative around. I mean, the government has its role to play in enforcing public safety, but civil society and educators have much to do as well.
You know, Ted, you had indicated earlier in your testimony, your written testimony, that in July of 2024, you were in Argentina, and I've also gone to that spot, the AMIA Jewish Center, where, as you point out, 85 people were killed, 300 others, the largest, and all fingers point to Iran. And you mentioned Iran, you know, how important that is, and that anything we're doing vis-a-vis Iran better include their anti-Semitic hatred. So if you want to, you know, expound upon that a little bit, and also I think you wanted to answer the original question.
Sure, I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman. I want to just make an observation. I agree very much with my colleagues in their assessment of countries around the world. And yes, it's important for leaders to lead, and there are, and Germany's an example, and Denmark has taken solid action, and Norway has done important things, and making sure that there's a plan to combat anti-Semitism. All of that is important, but I really want, I don't want anyone on the Lantos Commission to walk away from this hearing thinking that somehow the Jewish communities in these countries with rising anti-Semitism are cowering in the corner, or that we are simply hoping and praying for a good government to stand up and come to the rescue. It's really important for this commission especially to understand, as my colleagues referenced, what happens at the grassroots level in the Jewish community, the way that in our case, AJC works closely with, our Campus Global Board works closely with the World Union of Jewish Students, European Union of Jewish Students, and what it means when a Jewish student in Europe sits around a table with Jewish students from around the world, yes, bemoaning the rising anti-Semitism in the university system, but also what it means when she says, you know, the way that I react to this, every time someone screams at me that I should go to the showers or that I should go back to the country that I came from, every time that happens, it makes me want to buy a bigger Jewish star. It makes me want to be a prouder Jew. That sentiment exists in Jewish communities all around the world, even in the face of what they're experiencing. And I think it's really important for the Commission to acknowledge that and to understand that there is this powerful group to partner within the Jewish community, whether they're standing with governments who are supportive or whether they're standing with those in the opposition in governments who support the Jewish community against the often dangerous actions taken by the leaders in those countries. One last point on that, Mr. Chairman. In a couple of weeks, we'll be, again, on the issue of education, AJC and the CRIF in France will be holding a conference as the follow-on to last year's meeting that took place between the government of the United States and the government of France focused on anti-Semitism. Here, civil society bringing together student leaders from France and from the United States with university leaders from France and the United States to really focus on what's happening on the ground so that there is an awareness everywhere of what challenges have to be met. I think that's the role that civil society can and must play. On the question about Iran, about Argentina, but really about Iran, every single hearing, every single meeting around the world that is seriously attempting to address global anti-Semitism must start with the fact that the Iranians and the regime in Tehran is bent on destroying Israel and the Jewish people. It's bent on destroying the United States. It talks about the destruction of Israel every single day. And when it supports Hamas, whose charter says that they should massacre Jews, and when it supports Hezbollah, who has carried out attacks against Jews and the broader community around the world, including Americans, Mr. Chairman, as you well know, when it supports terror groups all around the world, and the IRGC within Tehran, when the IRGC is actively engaged in looking for ways to strike against the Jewish community, any effort to fight anti-Semitism must always include recognizing the serious and evil role that this Iranian regime plays in advancing anti-Semitism that has, as we saw in Argentina now over 30 years ago, has led to devastating consequences, attacks against the Jewish community. That's something that this commission well understands, and that we must all continue to elevate that in our conversations about anti-Semitism.
Thank you. I'll ask one question and then yield to my colleagues, and then we might do a second round if my colleagues are so disposed. You know, in the mid-1980s, Frank Wolf and I went to Perm Camp 35, and we met with a number of political dissidents and refuseniks and others. Sharansky had just left a couple months before. We tried to get to see him for 2 years. We were obstructed by the Soviet Union leadership, the foreign affairs people. We finally got there, and we photographed everybody, showed him when we came back. He said, they're all my friends, and they were still languishing, of course, in that horrible gulag in the Ural Mountains. A few years later, when we had him testify, he testified 3 times before my committee and many other times before other committees, House and Senate. Just one of the most powerful human rights activists the world has ever known. He talked about what you talked about a little bit, Ted, in your statement. I don't think you really got to it orally, when you said you want to take a moment to address opposition to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition due to concern it could be used to restrict speech. And then you went on to elaborate. Well, Sharansky, I remember, and he said this at the Berlin conference, he said, free speech, if you don't like what the Knesset is doing, voice it. If you don't like what Congress is doing, voice it. But he said, once it crosses that line, and he had his own definition, the 3 Ds as he called it, demonization, delegitimization, and double standard. And he said if one of those are manifesting, you could be darn sure that that is a manifestation of anti-Semitism. And I've never forgotten it, and I think we need, and you were alluding to that because there are people who don't like the definition because of a false sense of what that means. So Ted, did you want to further elaborate as you started to in your
Sure.
written testimony?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question comes up, the suggestion is made often that the IRA definition is somehow meant to censor criticism of Israel. And it's just simply untrue. There is no conflict between free speech rights as enshrined in the First Amendment in the United States and as important across the world, and the effort to identify anti-Semitism so that it can be confronted and combated. The fact is, this often leads, if I may, it often leads to a conversation about, well, these criticism of Israel isn't necessarily anti-Semitic. That's absolutely true. When the suggestion is made that the only country in the world that has no right to exist is the one Jewish state, then it's anti-Semitism. The IRA definition is not a speech code. It doesn't mean that language becomes outlawed, but it means that if you're being anti-Semitic, we can identify it. And what we saw after October 7th, and this is the best example, what we saw after October 7th, in the hours after the initial attacks, when there were still terrorists, frankly, on the ground in southern Israel, and we saw the so-called protests around the United States, those protesters who turned out weren't being critical of any actions taken by the IDF, by Israeli Defense Forces, in support of and in defense of its people, because they hadn't done anything yet. The ones who showed up in the immediate aftermath of that attack were there for one reason, and one reason only, and that was to support the Hamas terrorists who carried out the vicious attacks of October 7th. And it's important as these conversations take place that while the while the consideration of what is and isn't anti-Semitism, obviously free speech rights exist, but in the consideration of what is and isn't anti-Semitism, it's important for us to be able to identify what anti-Semitism is so that it can be confronted. It's the reason why the IRA definition has been adopted in 46 countries and in over 1,000 entities around the world, including so many cities and counties and states here in the United States. It shouldn't, there's nothing inconsistent with free speech. And in fact, if we're serious about being able to confront anti-Semitism, then we all ought to agree that it's important to define it. The only people who want to steer clear of identifying what anti-Semitism actually is are those who are espousing it. That's why this conversation is so important.
Mr. Co-Chairman, I would argue that the IRA working definition is more important now than it ever has been before, because if you look at what's happening on university campuses, and it's very helpful to hear from Jewish students, and we're trying to give them platforms and send them around so they could speak wherever their message can be heard, and some of them have spoken to the House and Senate. We're grateful for that. Jewish students, these demonstrations that have taken place on university campuses ostensibly are in protest of an Israeli policy, but they go so far beyond that. Jewish students are being threatened and harassed because they are Jewish. And this is an example of how anti-Israel hatred crosses the line into anti-Semitism and affects the day-to-day lives of Jews, particularly students who are on these campuses and are very vulnerable and fear for their safety. So I think it's more pressing than ever that IRA be embraced around the world and listen to the students. That's my advice to people who really want to hear how they are impacted.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just support what my colleague just said. ADL for years now has been supportive of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, including its contemporary examples, of course, for all the right reasons that my colleague have mentioned here. And I really think that it's important for us to maybe talk less about definitions and which one is better or worse, and talk more about action and what we can do to combat this rising emergency situation of anti-Semitism. And if you allow me, Chairman, I would just like to add something regarding Iran and your question to my colleague Ted Deutch. As an Argentinian, the AMIA bombing is very close to my heart, and I just want to remind everybody in this commission that it wasn't only Jews that were killed in that horrible terrorist attack against the Jewish center in Buenos Aires, but also non-Jews that were living nearby or working in that building, which again comes to prove that Iran is not a threat just to Jewish communities around the world or to the state of Israel, but really to democracies at large. And when we talk about Iran, they are not just the #1 exporter of terrorism in the world, but the #1 exporter of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial and distortion. And one of our action calls for this commission and for Congress is to take concrete action against the Iranian regime TV channels that are used around the world, including Press TV in English, in Europe and other countries, and Hispan TV, which is the Spanish language propaganda tool that Iran spreads anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism through it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nadler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yesterday in the New York Times, Michelle Goldberg wrote an opinion column about Donald Trump's Project Esther. I want to call your attention to one quote from the strategic plan for Project Esther published online. The plan states, quote, "Those supporters of Palestine and Hamas who have claimed for decades that criticizing Israel's policies does not equate to anti-Semitism are at best insincere, close quote. Goldberg comments on this quote that, quote, in the twisted logic of Project Esther, which is also the logic of Donald Trump's war on academia, ultra-Zionist Gentiles get to lecture Jews about anti-Semitism even as they lay waste to the liberal culture that has allowed American Jews to thrive, close quote. Ms. Burdett, what is your take on Project Esther, and how do you believe it measures up to President Biden's landmark national strategy?
That's an interesting question. I've never compared them side by side before. First of all, what you're saying is absolutely right. The Book of Esther is an important Jewish text to me. I'm a woman advocate in Washington, and I talk about Esther a lot and think about that book a lot. So the notion that a group of people who did not consult with, the organizations at this table came up with a prescription, kind of appropriated an important Jewish text, I guess maybe to help get buy-in or make it look like a deeply Jewish initiative, but it's very disrespectful, and it's not a best practice to try to defend a community kind of without talking to them and taking on a sacred text. Separate from that, I would say, and Project Esther was called a national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. So I suspect the Heritage Foundation and its task force saw them as comparable. Well, the Biden administration national strategy is very long. It has many, many recommendations, and basically you could summarize them as deploying all of the civil rights tools and mechanisms that we have at the disposal of the government to confront anti-Semitism. And Project Esther deploys the issue of anti-Semitism to confront many of the civil rights and protections that we have in our country. And the policy, it's particularly painful. There's been a lot of polling data in the Jewish community about how people feel about the administration's war on anti-Semitism. We're a small minority, Congressman Nadler, you know that. And when the United States government does something to protect our community, we want to be thankful. We feel vulnerable and we want to be thankful. But very high numbers of Jewish people do not support this action against anti-Semitism. They are not comfortable. Jewish students on campus will say they are uncomfortable with the notion that their fellow student could be deported because of a pretextual war on anti-Semitism. They're worried about being scapegoated also. And, we talk about like the IRA definition, which I don't think any definition should be codified into law. There's no evidence that it's needed. Okay, then I'll answer. But Project Esther and the way it uses these tools, they're being deployed against foreign students, right, who say things on social media. But what about a refugee from South Africa who uses the worst kind of anti-Semitism on social media, and my tax money pays to resettle them? The Jewish Family Services Agency in Buffalo had to resettle an anti-Semitic man when they're not bringing Jews from Iran here in our refugee program. Everyone's talked about Iran. What's it like to live there as a Jew?
Thank you. Ms. Burdett, since we are discussing global anti-Semitism, I was very disappointed during the Biden administration when the State Department published its global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism with an explicit embrace of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism alone. Unlike the Biden national strategy, which spoke of, quote, several definitions of anti-Semitism, including IRA, do you think the IRA definition, in contrast to other definitions like the Nexus document or the Jerusalem definition, makes Jews safer around the world? Do you believe the U.S. State Department should be actively encouraging other nations around the world to adopt the IRA definition? And I should tell you my bias here. I led the debate against the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act because it enshrined the IRA definition into law and specifically said don't pay attention to the other two definitions. And I am also mindful of the fact that Ken Stern, who worked at the AJC for many years and who was the author of the IRA definition, said don't codify it into law ever.
Thank you for the question. I mean, I am a firm believer as a practitioner, and now I work with institutions interpreting incidents on campus and companies all over the place. Codifying a definition, there's no evidence that a codified definition reduces anti-Semitism. There wouldn't be. Nobody's testing it. And it doesn't make sense that there would be. Their training and education and awareness probably helps our first responders to respond to bigotry, but there's very good reason that this country has not adopted definitions of any form of bigotry. Our laws respond. We defend protected classes, including Jews, from harassment and discrimination. But that doesn't mean that all of the definitions can't have value. In a training manual where they started in the OSCE, in the ODIHR, in the UN, in the Fundamental Rights Agency, all of the definitions do add value in different ways. Not one of them is a perfect all-purpose diagnostic magic wand that if you drop it into the code, Germany dropped the IHRA definition into the code. I'd like to see if there's a reduction there. I don't think there is. Maybe one of the other witnesses knows of something that I don't. And although I do know there was a slight dip in incidents in a couple countries. But so there's no evidence that it makes us safer. We should use them. The Biden administration used the IHRA definition. The Trump administration mandates the use of the IHRA definition. And as far as I can tell, they're using it to monitor the social media of foreign students, but not of an anti-Semitic refugee who has to be resettled in Buffalo. So even as a standard, it's not being applied fairly. And that's why definitions codified into law that are subject to people's judgment are not a good idea. And we should use all of the resources, and there are fantastic guides and resources out there that fill in a lot of vagaries and gaps of the IHRA definition. So no, I don't think the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act is necessary. It does one thing that has no proven evidence to make a Jew safer. People should use it just like it's being used now. People should use the Jerusalem Declaration, the Nexus document, and a lot of other resources.
But shouldn't put any of them into law.
There's no reason, we don't do it for any other, we don't do it for bigotry of any other kind.
Thank you. Congressman Deutch, the AfD in Germany is arguably the closest thing Germany has had to a revival of the Nazi Party since the Holocaust. In your prepared testimony, you wrote about the AfD, quote, "It is especially troubling that some of our own American elected officials have voiced support for them." What kind of signal does it send to European Jewry when Vice President Vance or Elon Musk promote, legitimize, and endorse the AfD, and when Vice President Vance tells the other parties in Germany to take down the firewall that they've erected against participation with the AfD?
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. I would start just by, again, making clear exactly what the history of AfD is and the impact that it's had as it's grown throughout Germany. Just a few points, because I think it's important to put them on the record. One of AfD's most prominent figures called Berlin's Holocaust Memorial a monument of shame, said Germany needs a 180-degree turn in how it remembers the past. The head of the party, with whom the vice president met, said that Germany must, I quote, "stop being a slave state to the U.S." Germany's domestic intelligence agency is monitoring the party as a potential extremist threat. Another spokesperson said, "America, like Germany, is under foreign control ruled by a war-hungry globalist elite." These are only a handful of the points. I think it's important for us to look at the actions taken by the German government and how the parties across Germany, across the political spectrum, what their approach to the AfD is, recognizing the background that I described, recognizing the dangerous history, and acknowledging that that kind of rhetoric, those kinds of statements, in a country where its history has been acknowledged. The German government has consistently, since the Holocaust, has consistently been recognized the special responsibility that it has to the Jewish community, to the state of Israel, and as we look at the response from, again, from the Jewish community in Germany and from the political parties across Germany, I think it's clear to see why the AFD is not a party to engage with.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Von Missy?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to say how important this hearing has been. I especially appreciate that this is the Tom Lantos Commission. Knowing Mr. Lantos's history, I didn't have the honor of serving with him, but knowing his history, I serve on the Education Committee, Education and Workforce Committee. And yes, I'm incredibly deeply disturbed by the rise in anti-Semitism, but I have to say that this hearing today has been more productive than the 8 hearings we had in the Education Committee, because this, to me, is like people who are here for a solution and understand the work ahead that we need to get done to address anti-Semitism, where oftentimes education hearings have felt very performative and not necessarily with the goal of solving the challenges that we have, and with the understanding that there are serious challenges. And Ms. Burdett, you said it's widely understood that criticism of Israel and Israeli policy is not on its own anti-Semitism. I so want that to be true. But we have seen with some of the things that have happened, some of the accusations that have been made, and I know from listening to all of this testimony and knowing what's happening with my own Jewish children, one of whom is on a campus, is that these incidences are very, very fact-specific. And so in the Education Committee, to sit there and listen to these accusations and allegations with people who want to dissolve the Department of Education and don't object to the cuts to the Office of Civil Rights seems incredibly frustrating and not productive, because the Office of Civil Rights is there to look at the facts of each specific case. Because I know there are some Jewish students who protest not pro-Hamas, but pro-human rights. And they can't be all painted with the same brush. They're very, very fact-specific. And Ms. Burdick, you also said that anti-Semitism is a sign of broader erosion of democratic norms. I agree with that. And I know there's already been comments made about some of the things we're seeing and hearing here in the United States. Of course, I have the note about the Charlottesville, Jews will not replace us. One of the things I want to add to the list is one of the people at that Unite the Right rally was Nick Fuentes, who got an invitation to go to Mar-a-Lago, even though he had compared Jews exterminated in concentration camps to cookies being baked on an oven. He still got his invitation to Mar-a-Lago. And then, you know, this horrific song, President Trump also hosted Kanye West, the same Kanye West who praised Hitler, who now has this despicable song that's been banned in Germany. And even though here in the United States, some music platforms have taken this song down from their sites, there's a notable exception, and that's Elon Musk's X, who kept a song on the platform where it continues to be widely spread and spread that anti-Semitic message. And I know there was a conversation about Germany's AFD party, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio's defended them. And it is incredibly concerning. You know, there are more examples, but I think the point has been made. U.S. leaders need to stand up to anti-Semitism regardless of its source. And I want to ask you, Congressman Deutch, first, thank you for coming back to Congress. We probably miss you more than you miss this place. So when leaders in the United States display anti-Semitism or embrace anti-Semitic individuals, how does that affect the rise or fall of anti-Semitism in other countries?
Well, it's very important, and it's nice to see you, Ms. Bonamici. I want to answer that by actually turning back to the language that you just used, because I think it's really important when you point out the importance of fact specifics of cases on campus and in communities, right. And that's so on campus. That's true. We knew. I think all of us up here could have predicted that as sure as we've seen the Holocaust denial and distortion, that after October 7th, that we would see those who denied the very atrocities that happened on October 7th, and we knew it was coming, and it did. There's now, and this is the reason facts are so important, there's now an effort to rewrite the history of what happened on campuses. The facts are different from campus to campus, but this growing narrative that suggests that somehow taking over the quad and not allowing Jewish students to cross, or refusing good grades to Jewish students unless they participated in protests against Israel, or student groups excluding anyone who supported Zionism, which is the overwhelming majority of Jews. Those facts really matter, and I just wanted to thank you, because I don't want us to go forward thinking that somehow what we saw on campus, which Congress has tried to respond to, which you've been so focused on in your committee, which so many of us up here have tried to respond to, and in AJC's case, working regularly with university presidents and deans and provosts and others to help address the fundamental fact that liberal education in America and asking hard questions and all the things we count on in our universities can't happen if an entire group is silenced. I think it's important to make that point. I appreciate you're raising this issue of the importance of facts. Look, in terms of messages that we send, we should be clear. I mean, every official in government, in Congress, everyone in a leadership position in America should be clear that there can be zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. We all have a responsibility to say that, to act that, to make sure that when we see, hear, experience anti-Semitism, that we never simply tolerate it, and we can't decide that somehow one kind of anti-Semitism is worse than the other. The fact is that anti-Semites don't check the political affiliation of the Jewish community when they decide to come after us, and so it requires all of us standing up and speaking out to prevent that from happening.
I appreciate that, and briefly, because I only have a minute, but both to Ms. Rosenberg and Ms. Burdett, on the topic of Holocaust education. I knew Alter Weiner in Oregon. He was a wonderful man and a Holocaust survivor who worked with students and wrote a fabulous book called From a Name to a Number. May his memory be a blessing. But Oregon is one of the, now I believe there are 29 states that requires Holocaust education. But to me, it almost seems like that's not enough. Right? It's not just because there's so many efforts now to change history, as Mr. Deutch was saying, to change versions of a history. I think we need more than that. And I'm interested in hearing from you about, because Holocaust education, as I said, it's important, but I don't think it's enough, because there's so many current issues as well that we need more critical thinking and understanding of. So if you'd like to respond to that, what's being done to really enhance understanding of, what's happening at college campuses, what really, the story of October 7th, and because there's distorted versions of that, as we know. So how can we work on making sure that it isn't just past history, but what's happening now that we need to enhance understanding of?
I'd like to just say, and I'll turn to my colleague from ADL to talk about, because ADL delivers programs in communities, but Congresswoman, it's worse than not enough. First of all, is there a correlation between a state with a Holocaust education mandate and a reduction in anti-Semitic incidents? It's not fully been studied, but it looks like no. What about states where there's a mandate for Holocaust education and a conflicting mandate against teaching diversity education? Because let me tell you, day one of Holocaust
there's that
education.
in every state right now.
Yeah, it's about
because of
race.
the threats, right.
So this has been a problem for a long time. And it's kind of like we want to talk about the Holocaust. We want to learn about something a long time ago. But, even my colleague here, I disagree that we should just put a full kibosh on comparisons. That is what, if you sit through Holocaust education, if you work with survivors, if you look at these lesson plans and get comparisons is part of how we learn history. We have to do it carefully, But a full ban, just chilling any comparison, I've heard Mr. Nadler do it. I've heard members of this House articulately, eloquently look at history and draw lessons. What are the lessons of the Holocaust to modern times? They're just euphemisms for sometimes there might be a dotted line of a comparison, not a grotesque comparison. Good people know the difference. So I think that we're conflicted or hypocritical. We want to mandate teaching of the Holocaust, but don't talk about how it's relevant to us right now.
I appreciate that as a member of the Education Committee, seeing the attacks on education and the attacks on diversity, equity, inclusion, and, an attempt to rewrite history in some ways. Sorry, Ms. Rosenberg.
Yes, if I may, in ADL's Global 100 survey that we launched in January this year, we checked 103 countries and territories on anti-Semitic attitudes, but also we had questions about the Holocaust. And we found that only 48% of adults worldwide recognize the historical accuracy of the Holocaust, meaning that the Holocaust indeed happened and that 6 million Jews were murdered. There's a lower number of Holocaust denial worldwide. We're only looking at 4% of the world population, but a higher percentage of Holocaust distortion. We're talking about 17% of adults worldwide that distort the facts of the Holocaust. And maybe even more shockingly, 20% of adults worldwide say that they haven't heard of the Holocaust. Now, ADL and other organizations' research have shown many times that the Holocaust education makes a difference, and people that are educated and know the facts about the Holocaust have less tendency of harboring anti-Semitic attitudes. But I do agree with you, Congresswoman, that it's simply not enough to teach about dead Jews. We need to teach about the living ones as well. People need to recognize the contribution of Jewish communities worldwide, what Jews are all about, that we are human beings, and also to teach about anti-Semitism. And this is part of the education work that ADL does, not only here in the US, but around the world. First, in giving tools for Jewish youth to combat anti-Semitism, but also to teach students in non-Jewish high schools about the local Jewish community and how they can become allies in fighting anti-Semitism.
Thank you. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, would you like to?
Yeah, to add on to this, I know better than to pick an argument with Stacy Burdett, but my concerns, particularly with inappropriate Holocaust analogies, if I ever hear someone refer to President Biden or President Trump or any other current day politician as Hitler, with apparently no understanding that Hitler's goal was the eradication of an entire people. We don't have that today. We have something different. You have to be able to draw these kind of obvious distinctions. But I also think, because it's Jewish American Heritage Month, and we should acknowledge that, part of the goal of Jewish American Heritage Month is to increase education. And this is something we need both inside the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community, not just of what the Jews have suffered, but of what the Jews have accomplished, what they have brought to the fabric of this country. We've been here throughout this country's history, and we've added so much. It's a good time to celebrate that and to educate not just the rest of the world, but ourselves as a Jewish community, because I tell you, as a father of 2 children, I don't just want them to learn about, Jewish victimhood. I want them to learn about that which is great about the Jewish tradition, that which is commendable about the Jewish tradition. And Jewish American Heritage Month is a good opportunity to emphasize that.
Thank you for your time. I do have one final question I'd like to ask, but to make a point on your point just a moment ago about remembering the tremendous contributions of Jews to our country, to the world. In 2004, 2003, I was in Warsaw, met with the curator of a museum that was looking for startup money, it was called the Museum on the History of Polish Jews. And the whole idea behind it was to show how during century after century, notwithstanding pogroms and other terrible things that happened, there was a great deal of cooperation and empathy across religious and ethnic lines, which were just incredible, that was going unlooked at. So I came back here, I wrote a bill, got it passed in the House, it went over to the Senate, and it was stopped. It would have provided $5 million of seed money for that museum. I'm happy to say that the museum is up and running, and it's just an example. We need more of that, I believe, to tell the great story of Jews, not only in our country, but in Europe and everywhere else. So your points were very well taken on that. The victimhood part needs to be emphasized as well, because past is prologue, and you have anti-Semites out there who live off hatred and if given the opportunity without restraints by government and significant penalties for what they do, vis-a-vis hate crimes and prosecutions. And of course, prosecutorial discretion means it needs to be a priority for prosecutors at every level, including U.S. attorneys. So I do thank you for bringing that up. I do have one final question, though. In the last Congress, the last 2 years, I chaired 4 hearings on anti-Semitism at the United Nations. We focused on UNRWA, we focused on the UN Human Rights Commission, Council, as it's called now, and other agencies of the UN where there's, without a doubt, a rampant, virulent anti-Semitism that manifests every single day. We had Hillel Nur among our many, many distinguished witnesses, you might recall, and he did an amazing job, chapter and verse, on all of this, and talked about how, you know, the reports that would come out of the UN were written by anti-Semites, particularly at the Human Rights Council, and that UNRWA was given a whitewash for all of its, you know, I would point out repeatedly, because I offered an amendment 20 years ago to defund UNRWA, passed the House, died in the Senate, and we were working on that again. Thankfully, the appropriators, and in a bipartisan way, we did stop funding for UNRWA, as did, you know, the president. So we, you know, that's where we're at now. But we could have stopped this child soldier factory a long time ago. And in one of our debates on the floor, I actually read portions of the Hamas Charter. I've read it before, but when you read it afresh, you know, there's a Jew hiding behind a rock. The rock will cry out, "There's a Jew here, come and kill him." It's barbaric, and yet they feed on that, and they create child soldiers. So no wonder, you know, as time goes on, you got a whole group of young people who become little older people, adolescents and teenagers and adults who hate Jews and seek to kill them. So Hillel Nur, I just want to do a shout out, because he's been such an amazing truth teller at a place where they don't want to hear it. So your thoughts on the UN. You know, the UN may be reflective of what's going on in individual countries, but it also may be an entity unto itself where this is bred and then brought back. And your thoughts on how we can further combat the anti-Semitism that is rife at the United Nations. Ms. Rosenberg?
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the question. The situation in the UN is very much of a deep concern of us. It has been for many, many years, but it has become more dire post-October 7th, when it has become very clear for many of us that UN agencies like UNRWA are not just indirectly supporting terrorism by providing textbooks that promote anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias, but UNRWA employees that directly were involved in the massacre of October 7th against Israeli children, women, and elderly. So one cannot expect that the State of Israel will continue to allow, for example, humanitarian aid that will end up in the hands of Hamas or the hands of UNRWA employees that serve Hamas. We have raised this directly with the UN Secretary General over a year ago. It's not just an issue of UNRWA, it's also an issue of other UN institutions that have been unsupportive of Jewish victims of October 7th, including when it comes to UN Women, for example, that took their time in recognizing the horrible attacks of Hamas against Israeli women on October 7th and after October 7th. So it's really important that the US and other like-minded countries around the world take concrete actions against the UN institutions and demand the UN Secretary General and the different UN bodies to make sure that they don't harbor anti-Semitism within their institutions. Thank you.
Well, I don't think we could say enough, nor do we have enough time, about the need to reform the discussion at the UN, the one-sided nature of the debate about the Middle East, and the anti-Semitism that it has fostered explicitly within the body and around the world. So I won't expand on that, but I did want to go back to what you said about the Polin Museum in Warsaw. Thank you for your early support of that. That museum is indeed up and running, and I'll tell you, it's regarded today as maybe the best history museum in Europe, not just the best Jewish history museum, a great history museum. And beyond that, it has become a safe space for discussing anti-Semitism and its current manifestations, an open, honest debate in the middle of a country that has some problems with anti-Semitism and maybe some reluctance to confront those problems, but it's become a space to do that. And finally, I want to say, because I think it needs to be said before we close out, I see you, Mr. Co-Chairman, sitting in front of the American flag, and I'm reminded of, we all represent the American Jewish community in different capacities. And so we have a right and an obligation to demand things of our government. But to know that the US government is willing to invest its power and prestige in the business of countering anti-Semitism and establishing that doing so is a priority of US foreign policy around the world. This is something of great reassurance to us, and it's something that really can make a difference. This goes for Democratic administrations, Republican administrations. The ongoing bipartisan commitment needs to be there. So thank you for the role that you have played in establishing this.
Thank you. Yes.
Sure.
Ted.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for raising this. Thank you for always raising this issue. Thank you for your incredible dedication to this issue. I think you said 17 hearings you've held. There is, on this one, I never feel comfortable speaking on behalf of the Jewish community. In this instance, I am absolutely comfortable speaking and expressing on behalf of the entire Jewish community the deep appreciation we feel to your commitment to fighting anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. I wanted to thank you for that. And you're right to bring up this issue. Look, before October 7th, we were all focused on the UN's obsession with Israel at the expense of seemingly every other part of the world. And since October 7th, the silence that we heard coming from the United Nations was appalling. What should be done? We need to hold accountable anyone who espouses anti-Semitic beliefs, regardless of who they are and regardless of what position he or she may hold within the United Nations system. We have a UN Human Rights Council that is stacked in favor of human rights abusers, that requires radical reform if it's to be taken seriously in carrying out the interests that this commission has so admirably advocated for so many years. It requires the United Nations Anti-Semitism Action Plan being fully implemented right now in the most serious terms. And finally, I know that there is an ongoing debate that takes place here. I was a part of it when I served in this body. The fact is, we believe that engaging at the UN, that in forcefully standing up for American values at the United Nations and pushing for the kinds of reforms at the Human Rights Council and elsewhere throughout the UN strengthen our ability to do the kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish here today. engagement matters. UNESCO is a great example. The fact that, that UNESCO has taken such significant steps in the Holocaust education area because the U.S. chose to engage. AJC being a part of that engagement in the way that we do as well. This is a moment for the UN to stand up, for the U.S. to stand up. I hope that there is quick action. The president is nominated, hasn't officially nominated, is moving forward with a new ambassador to the United Nations. For us to really assert our leadership there, we need to move forward. I will tell you, Mr. Chairman, at AJC, we look forward to welcoming the new the U.S. ambassador to the UN and working together in all of these areas that I've just discussed. It is critical, if there is going to ever be change at the UN, that the United States plays a leadership role, just as you have advocated for throughout your career. And I'm really grateful that you chose to bring that up before we finish here.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our very distinguished witnesses for your daily leadership. It is not only respected, it motivates. So I can't thank you enough for that. Without you, I wouldn't say we would be totally rudderless, but we might be. You have really provided the direction for all of us to go forward. And to my good friend and colleague, Ted, thank you for, when Ted announced he was leaving, I said, Ted, we got to have you back to be on the other side, not on this side of the dais to provide testimony. And what an extraordinary job you're doing. Can't thank you enough. You are really the right person for the right job. And thank you so much for that. And all of you, thank you. Without anything you would want to add, we could add it to the record. Just get it to us as quickly as you can. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
It's fun. Nice to see you.
Let's do this again. Let's do this
You
again.
should take this on the road. I have some thoughts, actually. I'm going to follow up. Seriously.